Red and blue lights smear across the rain-slicked windshield, strobing the inside of the sedan like a warning heartbeat. Captain Naomi Carter tightened her grip on the steering wheel, jaw set, pulse steady in the way it had learned to be after years of training. The officer's boots crunched behind her, slow and deliberate, as if time itself had been instructed to wait. "License and registration," he said, voice flat, eyes already searching for something to confirm what he decided the moment he saw her. Naomi handed them over. She watched as them linger on her name, the pause just long enough to feel intentional. A second cruiser rolled up, then a third. The night grew louder, radios crackling, doors opening, murmurs layering into a familiar, suffocating hum. "Step out of the vehicle." She complied. Cold air bit through her jacket. Somewhere nearby, a phone camera lifted. She felt the old anger rise, the one she kept buried under discipline and rank. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" she asked evenly. He smirked, leaning closer. "You don't look like someone who should be asking questions." The words landed sharp, precise, meant to cut. Naomi's eyes flicked to his badge number, then to the squad car where another officer was already typing her name into a system that had never protected her. Hands moved toward cuffs. Above them, a traffic camera blinked red. And miles away, inside a secure federal facility, her unit's emergency line began to ring. The lights hit me just as I exhaled, a sharpest of breath I didn't know I was holding. My mind is still replaying the briefing, the sterile room, the digital map glowing with coordinates that will never exist in any public record. I feel a flicker of relief as I turn onto the empty highway, the city thinning, warehouses looming in shadows, street lamps flickering like half-remembered warnings. And then, red and blue, sharp, sudden, and searing in my mirrors. My spine snaps straight. I signal. I slow. I pull over. "Of course," I murmur, more exhaustion than anger. The officer approaches slowly. I watch him in the side mirror, the hand resting near his belt, the way his gaze scans my car before locking on me. I roll down the window before he even speaks. "Evening, ma'am," he says. "Do you know why I stopped you?" "No, officer." "You were swerving." "I wasn't." He knows it. I keep my voice calm. "I don't believe I was." His eyebrow lifts just slightly. "License and registration." I hand them over. The flashlight lingers on my hands, my jacket, the passenger seat. Too long. He reads my name once. Then again. Step out of the vehicle. Am I being detained? He smiles, no warmth. "For now, let's just say I need to make sure everything's safe." I open the door slowly, feel the cold, damp air bite at my skin. Another cruiser pulls up behind the first, then another. Radios crackle. "Is there a problem?" I ask, hands where I can see them. "They are," I say. He ignores me. "Where are you coming from tonight?" "Work." "What kind of work?" I meet his eyes. Federal. His posture shifts, suspicion sharpening into something else. "Turn around," he says. "I haven't done anything wrong." Turn. Around. I comply. The cuffs click close around my wrists, too tight. I inhale through my nose, grounding myself the way I've been trained. I catalog details instead of reacting. The badge number, the cruiser ID, the traffic camera blinking above. A second officer leans in. "You got priors, ma'am?" "No." "Funny. System's taking a while. Maybe you spelled my name wrong." Silence. Then a low laugh. Watch the attitude. A phone camera clicks across the street. Someone whispers. I feel the familiar weight settle in my chest. The knowledge that this moment will be flattened, shared, judged without context. I'm shoved into the back of the cruiser. The door slams shut. On the radio, voices crackle. "Sarge wants to know what you've got." The first officer glances at me through the glass. Suspicious behavior. Non-compliant. I close my eyes, counting the beats of my own pulse. Miles away, in a secure operations center, a digital board updates. One icon fails to check in, and the system, slow, grinding, inevitable, begins to notice. The holding cell smelled of bleach and stale coffee. Naomi sat on the edge of the metal bench, wrists still tingling from the tight cuffs, mind running through procedure after procedure. Every instinct told her how to act, how to survive, how to turn a dangerous encounter into information. But tonight, this was different. The danger wasn't enemy combatants or tactical traps. It was ignorance, bias, and the arbitrary power of men who assumed she didn't belong anywhere she was. The first officer lingered near the door, arms crossed. "Name?" he asked, the word clipped flat, like he didn't even need her answer to decide who she was. "Naomi Carter." "Captain," she replied evenly. Her tone carried none of the fear he seemed to expect. She watched his lips twitch. "Captain of what?" The single word dripped with doubt, disbelief. "Of a federal unit. Special operations," she said. Nothing changed. No wide eyes. No respect. Just another pause. Another judgment passed silently between them. The second officer pushed a chair toward her cell, sat with elbows on knees. "You're not what we expected," he said, almost conversational. But Naomi recognized the danger in the phrasing. He didn't just doubt her rank, he doubted her right to speak it aloud. She let a small smile form, neutral, professional. "I assure you, officer, you were expecting the wrong person." "Funny," he muttered, almost to himself. "City people like you, they think rules are for everyone else." Naomi's eyes narrowed. She didn't rise to the bait. She cataloged, observed, remembered. Names, voices, gestures. The little tales of men who believed themselves untouchable. Minutes stretched. Then an older officer entered, holding a folder carelessly. "Your public defender is on her way," he said, flipping through pages with a lazy precision. "She's busy, apparently." Naomi's lips pressed into a thin line. Public defenders were often overworked, unprepared, and too polite to push back against this kind of behavior. She wasn't used to depending on anyone else to navigate injustice, but tonight she had no choice. As the minutes ticked by, snippets of conversation leaked from the adjacent cell block. Voices, whispers, a few muffled laughs, the undercurrent of casual cruelty that came with power. Naomi leaned back against the cold wall, pulling her jacket tighter, and remembered the morning she had sworn her oath. She had joined the military with a single goal: to be counted on, to be prepared for situations that seemed impossible. She had faced insurgents, ambushes, betrayal, but nothing compared to being underestimated simply because of the color of her skin. The door clicked. A young woman in a gray blazer stepped in, briefcase in hand. "Captain Carter?" "Yes." Naomi rose, straightening. Every move controlled, precise, like a soldier rehearsing a drill. "I'm Lila Grant. I'll be representing you," the woman said, voice polite but tired. She dropped the briefcase, opened it, rifled through papers. "I just got here. Well, I'll need you to explain what happened." Naomi sighed internally but kept her face neutral. "It started as a routine traffic stop," she said, her voice low, calm. "It escalated when I refused to answer questions beyond what the law requires, and officers began implying criminal behavior without cause." Lila's brow furrowed. "Do you have documentation?" "Anything." "Yes," Naomi said. She reached into her pocket, producing the digital briefing pad she always carried. Officers flinched at the metallic hum as it powered up, unaware she had secure channels and encrypted logs accessible from anywhere. She ignored them, showing the device to Lila, who immediately understood the significance. "You need to stay calm," Lila said. "I know this seems minor, but media attention can turn everything upside down. They'll report arrests without context." Naomi nodded. "I know. I've seen this before." Her mind wandered briefly to the dozen operations she had led, the lives she had protected. This was different. The threat was invisible, structural, and every misstep by someone like her would be magnified into a headline. A commotion near the booking counter drew Naomi's attention. Another officer, tall, red-faced, was laughing as he showed a phone screen to colleagues. "See this?" he said. "She's the one from the news feed last week. Driving all suspicious-like. You know, huh?" Naomi felt the old weight settle. The scrutiny, the objectification, the constant undercurrent of disbelief that women like her had earned anything. Lila leaned closer. We need to control the narrative before someone else does. Naomi exhaled slowly. Control it, yes, but expose the truth. That's the point. Hours passed. She watched every interaction, every casual gesture from officers. Each one confirmed patterns she had already studied in manuals and case studies. The assumptions, the jokes, the coded language meant to humiliate without overt accusation. She cataloged names, badge numbers, and dates, everything she could use to build evidence. Finally, the public defender came to speak with the officers on her behalf. Naomi's release was approved, but with conditions that carried an implicit warning. Step lightly, or the system would reassert control in ways subtle and cruel. As she stepped out of the precinct, rain soaking through her jacket, she noticed her name trending on social media. Stripped of context, comments questioned her story, doubted her credentials, laughed at her supposed attitude problem. Naomi's pulse steadied. She had faced impossible odds before. She would face them again. The call came almost immediately after she entered her car. Secure line, coded tone, familiar frequency. Captain Carter. A voice said, "We've got a situation. You need to brief immediately. Full team standby." The world outside the car continued in its chaos, but inside Naomi's mind, the rules had changed. The woman they thought she was, the compliant, powerless figure, didn't exist. And now, they were about to find out what that meant. The secure operations center hummed with quiet urgency. Rows of monitors bathed the room in sterile blue light, displaying feeds from distant cities, classified missions, and encrypted communications. Every seat was filled with faces trained to read danger in seconds, to act decisively when lives hung in the balance. And yet tonight, a ripple of unease moved through the room that no drill could have prepared them for. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, Naomi's second-in-command, stood at the edge of a communications console, frowning. The system had flagged a critical absence. Naomi's check-in hadn't come through. Not unusual at first glance, but unusual in the context of a public arrest. "Something's off," he muttered, more to himself than to the team. Sergeant Elena Vega, monitoring digital channels, glanced up. "You think it's protocol? Another field delay?" Marcus shook his head. "No, not with her. Naomi's never missed a scheduled check-in unless she's physically unable. And she wouldn't just disappear." A junior operator piped up. "We're getting chatter online videos, streams. Someone pulled cell footage near the precinct. She's the one in handcuffs. Full uniform? No. Civilian clothes, yeah, but..." His voice trailed off. Elena leaned forward. "The precinct? That's local jurisdiction. Federal ops don't usually intervene unless we're flagged." "That's tricky." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We don't have time for tricks. We need intel. Now, trace the feeds, get officer IDs, find out what they're saying, who's involved." The team moved swiftly. Keyboards clacked. Screens updated and encrypted lines hummed. They traced the videos to several devices, noting timestamps, angles, and bystanders. The longer they looked, the more apparent the bias became. Officers confidently misstated events, assumed guilt, and dismissed the protests, all caught on low quality but undeniable recordings. Elena's voice was tight. "They're spinning it. Headlines already. Federal official stops traffic chaos. Woman resists police. Suspicious behavior in city streets." Not a word about misconduct. Marcus slammed a fist lightly against the console. "Exactly. And if the public believes that, the internal reviews will favor the department. We can't let this escalate before we have a legal foothold." The commotion outside the operations center, online chatter, live streams, news alerts, felt distant but suffocating. Naomi's absence weighed more than her physical location. It weighed like a question without an answer, like every system she had built and every person she had trained depended on her presence. "Emergency mobilization protocol?" asked Elena. Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. We need confirmation first. No leaks, no exposure. If we move prematurely, it'll compromise the operation and her. We keep it tight until we know exactly what we're dealing with." Minutes felt like hours. Marcus's mind ran through every possible scenario. Procedural arrest gone wrong. Local law enforcement overstepping, media frenzy, potential escalation. He considered intervention tactics that wouldn't reveal their full capabilities, just enough to stabilize the situation until Naomi could communicate directly. Then the secure line pinged. Naomi's encrypted device, long-range emergency beacon, the one only her unit could access, registered a signal. Marcus grabbed the console, fingers flying over keys. "She's active," he said, "and she's signaling. Not standard distress. It's tactical, calibrated, precise. She's moving, but we don't know how much they've compromised." Elena leaned closer. "What do we do? Do we alert federal oversight? Go through chain of command?" Marcus shook his head. "We wait. We monitor. Any premature interference draws attention and gives them leverage. Right now, the priority is situational awareness. Every angle, every officer, every video traceable." Outside the monitors, a muted feed showed Naomi being escorted into a room. Officers whispered, laughed, dismissed her calmly stated rights. The camera's angle was tight. Only body language spoke the truth. Naomi's spine was straight, jaw set, hands folded in front, mind cataloging, observing, planning. Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line. She's in a holding room, likely preparing for the interrogation phase. Everything we saw on feed confirms it. They're underestimating her. Classic. Assume compliance. She's not. Elena glanced at the team. All channels ready for extraction orders. If she signals escalation, ready. Marcus said, eyes fixed on the feed. But we do not move unless she authorizes. She's in control, always. Our role is to watch, record, and ensure no outside factor compromises her decision-making. She doesn't make mistakes, and we won't either. Not tonight. The team fell into tense silence, eyes darting between monitors and secure communications. Every second counted. Every misjudged word could turn public opinion or put Naomi in real danger. A junior analyst finally whispered, voice shaking. "Sir, her release just popped up. They're letting her go. But it's conditional, warning, fine, surveillance, all the usual tactics to intimidate." Marcus exhaled slowly, but relief didn't soften him. It's a calculated move. They want to control her. Public humiliation, reputational strain. That's why we're here. Not to fight, but to observe. Not to intervene, but to record every injustice, every microaggression, every systemic failure. That's our mission. Elena nodded. She'll handle it. Yes, Marcus agreed. She always does. And tonight, they'll learn the cost of underestimating Naomi Carter. In the precinct, unbeknownst to them, Naomi stepped into the cold night, aware that every camera, every bystander, every whispered judgment was a piece of a puzzle only she could solve. Across the city, in the operations center, Marcus and his team prepared for the next move. Every channel open, every eye sharp, every hand ready. They were waiting for her signal, and they would act only when she gave it. The precinct smelled of stale coffee and official indifference. Naomi had been released hours earlier, but the tension lingered like fog. She had stepped out into the cold night, hands freed, yet weighed down by the knowledge that her every movement, every word, would now be scrutinized. Outside, flashes from phones illuminated bystanders' curiosity and judgment. Citizens capturing fragments of the story they didn't understand. Inside, the officers who detained her gathered at a table cluttered with folders, report forms, and half-empty mugs. Officer Daniels, the one who had first approached Naomi, leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming against the edge. "Make sure we word it right," he said. "Suspicious behavior, non-compliance, keep it clean." "Clean?" Officer Roth asked, smirking. "You mean like she's guilty without proof?" Daniels shrugged. "The report doesn't need proof. It needs to protect us. That's the system." The team laughed quietly, an easy, complacent sound. They were unaware that the narrative they were crafting was being watched in real time by analysts far beyond their jurisdiction. Meanwhile, Naomi drove home, rain-slicked streets reflecting neon lights like fractured mirrors. She didn't speak. She cataloged, remembered, planned. Her hands gripped the wheel not with fear, but with intent. Every word in every officer's report would later be dissected, compared with body cam footage, with witness statements. She knew the law, but more importantly, she knew people, and people were flawed. Back at the precinct, Daniels typed, each word chosen to imply authority, suspicion, and compliance. Vehicle stopped for erratic driving, he wrote. Subject displayed attitude, questioned authority, delayed verification credentials. He glanced at Roth, who nodded approvingly. Perfect, Roth said. Covers us, makes it look difficult, and bonus, supports promotion packet. Naomi's phone buzzed. Secure encrypted. A short message. All feeds secured. Pattern confirmed. Keep calm. Watch the spin. She read it once, then set the phone on silent. Every step would be deliberate. She had learned long ago that reaction without plan was dangerous. Patience was power. The next morning, news outlets ran variations of the story. Headlines screamed, federal official stops traffic chaos. Woman resists police. Suspicious behavior sparks arrest. Not one mention of procedure, legality, or officer bias. Naomi scrolled to the feed, expression unreadable. She had expected this. The world wasn't fair, and truth was always secondary to narrative. At the unit's headquarters, Marcus and Elena reviewed the situation. They're trying to control the narrative, Marcus said, rubbing his temple. Classic move. Shift blame, minimize scrutiny. She's a target, but the system hides behind bureaucracy. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard. I've got officer IDs, timestamps, phone numbers, social media coverage. Every misstep they make is cataloged. Marcus nodded. Good. Document everything. No exaggeration. When the time comes, the truth will be indisputable. They underestimate her, and that's their mistake. Naomi's own reflection was sharper. At work, she interacted with colleagues normally, presenting calm and authority, but inside, tension coiled in her chest. Every misjudged glance, every coded remark from co-workers reminded her that even outside the precinct, systemic bias lingered. Her personal phone rang. Lila Grant, the public defender, was on the line. Captain Carter. The report they filed. It's sanitized but misleading. We can challenge it. But the system will resist. You're going to be portrayed as the problem. I expected as much, Naomi replied. The truth is inconvenient. The goal is to survive it with evidence intact. Let them paint, let them spin. We'll have the canvas. Do you plan to go public? Lila asked, hesitating. Naomi's gaze shifted to the window, where a pedestrian filmed her car with a cell phone. Not yet, she said. If I go public now, they control the narrative by reaction. We wait. We expose. Timing is everything. Hours later, she returned to the precinct, not to confront, but to observe. From a safe distance, she watched a sergeant show footage to a group of officers, pointing out her gestures, her speech, her attitude, as though dissecting evidence of guilt. Each laugh, each smirk, was a puzzle piece in a system built to humiliate, protect itself, and maintain hierarchy. Naomi noted every badge number, every uniform crease, every tone of voice. Her mind ran simulations, contingency plans, and possible outcomes. She had faced missions with hostile forces, where the odds were stacked, but this bureaucratic theater required the same precision and discipline. By evening, the precinct was quiet. Reports were filed, supervisors satisfied, and the officers left with a sense of accomplishment. Naomi's phone vibrated again. Situation monitored. Pattern confirmed. No unauthorized interference. Proceed when ready. She exhaled, a brief release. Justice would come, but not without patience, without careful orchestration. Every action taken against her tonight would later become evidence. Every casual remark, every misused authority, every report spun in their favor could be flipped into accountability. The night was long, and the rain fell steadily. Naomi sat in her apartment, letting the weight of the days settle. She understood the cost, stress, scrutiny, isolation, but also the opportunity. The officers believed they held power. They were wrong. Tomorrow would bring hearings, statements, and public attention. But for now, the story was hers to prepare. She would not rush. She would not react. She would document, observe, and wait. Outside, city lights reflected on wet pavement. Somewhere in the chaos, a system believed itself unchallenged. Naomi Carter, resolute and patient, prepared to prove otherwise. Naomi Carter returned to work the next morning with her usual calm, professional stride. The halls of the federal facility were quiet, punctuated only by the soft hum of computers and distant conversations of analysts and officers in training. To anyone watching, she appeared unaffected, composed, a model of discipline. But beneath that exterior, tension coiled tight as steel springs, every nerve alert to the world's misunderstanding of her. Her team greeted her cautiously. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes approached first. "You okay?" he asked quietly, eyes scanning her face of cracks. Naomi gave a small, controlled smile. "I'm fine. They released me. That's the important part." "Doesn't feel fine, though," Marcus said. "I saw the headlines. The social media chatter. People twisting everything. You're a target, and everyone knows it." "I expected that," Naomi said evenly. "We handle the facts, Marcus. Let the rest speak for themselves." In the conference room, the unit's analysts had already compiled the reports and footage from the night before. Every movement, every word from the officers involved, every fragment of video and audio, cataloged, time-stamped, and secured. Naomi scanned the evidence with meticulous attention, her mind racing through permutations of legal strategy and public response. Elena Vega, monitoring live feeds of online discussion, shook her head. "They're spinning it hard. Calls to the precinct asking why they released you without charges. Comments questioning your credentials. Some news anchors calling it a mysterious delay. It's frustrating." Naomi's jaw tightened. Frustrating is accurate. But frustrating is not dangerous. Panic is dangerous. We act with precision. Later, a small group meeting unfolded. Some team members argued for immediate public exposure, to clear Naomi's name before misinformation spread further. "If we don't act," one analyst said, "people will continue to believe the story as they see it. The officers control the narrative right now." Naomi listened. Her dark eyes, steady and sharp, swept over each face. "And what do you suggest?" she asked, calm but commanding. "Do we compromise classified information to prove a point? Do we escalate before we understand the full implications?" "Not necessarily," Elena replied, "but there's risk in silence. Every hour they spin it, they gain more influence. People forget nuance, they respond to headlines." Naomi folded her hands. Silence is not passivity. Documentation is not silence. Patience is not weakness. We observe, record, and wait. Exposure without preparation is reckless. We do this my way. Her team fell silent, realizing the weight of her words. They had faced impossible missions before, but this, navigating a world that underestimated her, that weaponized bias, required a different kind of precision. Hours later, Naomi attended a briefing on another operation. Officers glanced at her with curiosity. Whispers followed her through the halls. Some were subtle, others thinly veiled. She cataloged it all. The microaggressions, the dismissive glances, the assumptions implicit in every interaction. The cost of being underestimated, she knew, was constant vigilance. Her phone buzzed during a break. Lila Grant, her public defender, called. "They're trying to minimize the story," she said. "Press coverage will fade, but online chatter is persistent. They want you to appear compliant, quiet, even apologetic. It's frustrating." Naomi's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's the point," she said. "They believe compliance and silence can disarm me, but we're watching. Everything they do is evidence." The afternoon stretched. Naomi moved through her day with mechanical precision, answering questions, reviewing reports, leading simulations. Yet each glance from colleagues, each interaction with administrative staff, reminded her the night before the officers' assumptions, the public's misperception, the system's protective mechanisms that allowed abuse to persist. By late evening, Naomi gathered with Marcus and Elena to discuss strategy. "We need to prepare for escalation," she said. "Not retaliation, documentation, public record, legal precision. Anything else risks everything. The officers will think they're safe. That's when mistakes happen. Marcus leaned back. And if the public doesn't wait, if they attack before we move, then we act methodically, Naomi replied. We control the narrative with facts, not emotion. Every report, every timeline, every video clip, ready for scrutiny. The rest is noise. Her team nodded. They knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about systemic accountability, about exposing patterns of behavior and ensuring consequences match misconduct. The officers who underestimated Naomi would learn that discipline, patience, and strategy could match brute authority. As the meeting ended, Naomi remained behind, alone in the empty operations room. Screens flickered with data, social media feeds, and encrypted communications. She watched the city through the window, rain-slicked streets reflecting neon advertisements, traffic lights, and the anonymous lives of those who would never know the half-truth of what happened. She exhaled slowly. The night had cost her peace, trust, and innocence. Not in a literal sense, but an emotional awareness that the world often judged by appearance and assumption. The cost of silence was heavy, but it was a price she was willing to pay to ensure justice, not just for herself, but for every other person subjected to bias and misjudgment. Her phone vibrated once more, a secure, encrypted message. Situation continues. Evidence secured. No unauthorized interference detected. Stand by for next step. Naomi smiled faintly. It wasn't relief. It was readiness. The officers, the media, the public, they believed they held power. They had underestimated her. And they would pay for it. Not in revenge, but in exposure, accountability, and truth. The city woke to a different reality. By morning, the leak had surfaced, a body cam video from a night of Naomi's traffic stop. It was raw, unedited, and undeniable. Across social media and news sites, the clip played on repeat. Her calm, measured words, the officers' dismissive gestures, their escalating tone, and the moments that clearly contradicted their official reports. Naomi sat in the secure operations room, arms crossed, watching the public reaction in real time. Analysts monitored trending hashtags, viewer counts, and commentary threads. It's going viral, Elena said, fingers flying across keyboards. Every news outlet is picking it up. The narrative is changing. People are starting to see what really happened. Marcus Hayes exhaled, tension still evident in his posture. It's not over. They'll try to spin it back. They always do. But right now, the truth is out there and it's in our favor. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had expected this, planned for it. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the video feed. Every microaggression, every dismissive comment from the officers, every fabricated impression of non-compliance was now documented for the public, for legal review, for systemic accountability. A secure call came in from Lila Grant. Captain Carter, the video, this is huge. It contradicts every report filed against you. We can challenge the department, demand internal reviews, and even press for criminal charges if needed. Naomi leaned back in her chair, voice measured. Prepare the statements, but we proceed carefully. I don't want emotion. I want precision. The public sees, but we ensure the legal framework is airtight before anything else happens. The video clips were shared, analyzed, and dissected. Every frame told a story the officers hadn't intended. Their assumptions, the power imbalance, the casual dismissal of a black woman asserting her rights. By mid-morning, mainstream news anchors began reporting cautiously, showing the contrast between Naomi's composed professionalism and the officers' conduct. In the precinct, the officers involved realized something was wrong. Daniels muttered to Roth, voice tight, eyes darting. How did this leak? Who, how? Roth ran a hand through his hair, unsettled. Doesn't matter. Damage is done. The narrative's changing. People aren't buying our story anymore. Meanwhile, Naomi prepared for the internal review board. She would testify without revealing classified details, using her own precise recollection and the supporting video evidence. Every statement was calculated, every pause measured. She knew the board would try to probe, to minimize, to discredit her, but she was ready. At the review, The room was tense. Officers sat with rigid postures, attempting confidence, while board members questioned, probed, and referenced reports that no longer matched reality. Naomi's words were clear, her tone calm but unwavering. I was detained without cause. I complied with lawful requests, but I was misrepresented in reports. Evidence now confirms this discrepancy. Silence followed her statement. Board members exchanged glances. Officers fidgeted, and the room felt charged, heavy with accountability. Every lie, every assumption, every attempt to obscure truth now met resistance. After hours of questioning, Naomi left the review room. She was drained but composed. Outside, the media frenzy continued. Headlines now reflected nuance. Federal officer misrepresented by local police, body cam footage challenges arrest narrative, community demands accountability. The shift was subtle but significant. Back at the operations center, Marcus and Elena debriefed with Naomi. The system's responding, Elena said. Internal affairs, federal oversight, public opinion. They're all starting to pressure the department. Naomi nodded. It's working, but this is just the beginning. Exposure doesn't guarantee justice. It creates opportunity for accountability. But we must stay disciplined. Every statement, every move, every decision will be scrutinized. The officers who had detained her began to feel pressure mounting. Supervisors reviewed reports, questioning the discrepancies between official filings and the video evidence. An internal memo circulated, noting potential misconduct, failure to follow protocol, and misrepresentation in documentation. Daniels and Roth realized the precariousness of their positions. At night, Naomi returned home, exhausted but vigilant. Her phone buzzed with encrypted updates from her unit, messages confirming monitoring, evidence preservation, and preparation for the next phase. She reflected on the cost. Sleepless nights, constant scrutiny, emotional weight. Exposure had shifted public perception, but the work of accountability, the enforcement of consequences, was still ahead. Yet in the quiet, Naomi allowed herself a moment of clarity. She had been underestimated again and again by colleagues, by the system, by officers who believed their authority was absolute. Tonight, they saw her, not just a black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time, but a disciplined, resilient professional whose preparation and foresight turned vulnerability into leverage. She sent one last secure message to Marcus. Evidence verified. Next steps ready. Maintain discipline. Do not engage prematurely. Outside, the city lights reflected on wet streets, indifferent to the struggles of individuals. But now, the narrative had shifted. The officers could no longer control the story. They could no longer dismiss her presence or discredit her professionalism. The world was watching, and Naomi Carter had ensured that truth would not be ignored. In a room far from the precinct, federal oversight teams began reviewing evidence, body cam footage, and procedural violations. The first cracks in the officers' defenses were showing. Naomi's patience, discipline, and strategy had turned a humiliating encounter into a powerful assertion of accountability. And for the first time since the night began, she allowed herself a measure of satisfaction. Not triumph, never that, but the certainty that systemic exposure had begun and justice, however incremental, was finally within reach. The review hearing room was austere and cold, dominated by a long mahogany table and rows of chairs for observers. Fluorescent lights flickered slightly, bouncing off polished surfaces and casting stark shadows across the walls. Naomi Carter walked in, head held high, spine straight. Every step was measured, every gesture controlled. She was acutely aware of the cameras, the board members, the officers who detained her, and the small crowd of observers sitting quietly along the perimeter. The lead board member, a gray-haired woman with a sharp gaze, gestured toward Naomi. "Captain Carter, please state your account of the events leading to your detention." Naomi's voice was calm, steady, carrying a weight that filled the room. "On the evening of January 14th, I was pulled over by local law enforcement after leaving a federal briefing. At no point did I engage in behavior warranting suspicion or detention. I complied with all lawful requests. The officers involved, however, misrepresented my actions in official reports, labeling compliant behavior as noncompliance. Body cam footage now confirms this misrepresentation. Officer Daniels shifted in his seat, a flash of discomfort crossing his face. Roth avoided eye contact entirely. Their previously confident demeanors had begun to erode. One board member, younger in intent, leaned forward. "Can you provide evidence to support your statement?" Naomi nodded. Reaching into her folder, she handed over body cam footage, timestamp logs, and a detailed timeline compiled by her team. Each piece was precise, unambiguous, and legally verifiable. Every report, every observation, every discrepancy is documented. The officers' statements conflict directly with the evidence. A murmur ran through the room. One board member tapped notes into a tablet, while another exchanged a glance with an assistant. Naomi noticed a subtle shift in energy, the weight of authority beginning to tilt in her favor. Daniels finally spoke, voice tight, attempting composure. "Captain Carter, is it not true that you were uncooperative and questioned authority during the stop?" Naomi's eyes locked onto his. "I question requests beyond what is legally permissible. Compliance with unlawful or unnecessary interrogation is not required. Questioning does not equal obstruction. My actions were within the scope of the law, and body cam evidence confirms this." Roth leaned forward, trying a different angle. "You seem confrontational. Your tone, your demeanor." Naomi cut him off, calm but firm. "I spoke clearly and respectfully. Tone is subjective. Facts are objective. The objective facts are documented and observable. Your mischaracterization of my behavior is now part of the record." Board members nodded, some jotting notes. The room was no longer a courtroom of speculation, but a chamber of accountability. Every misstep by the officers, every exaggeration, every coded remark was being exposed. Naomi's composure, her evidence, and her disciplined presentation left little room for denial. An assistant whispered to the lead member. She raised her hand. "Captain Carter, is there anything further you wish to add regarding the systemic implications of this incident?" Naomi's lips pressed into a line. "This is not an isolated incident. Microaggressions, assumptions based on race, and misuse of authority are pervasive. Officers are empowered by structures that protect their actions, while marginalized individuals face scrutiny for asserting legal rights. This incident is an example of a larger pattern, one that requires accountability, transparency, and systemic change." Silence fell again. Even Daniels shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, the officers realized that this hearing was not just about their specific actions, but about the structural environment that enabled those actions. The lead board member spoke slowly. "Your testimony is noted. Your evidence has been reviewed. The board will deliberate and issue findings regarding misconduct, procedural violations, and potential disciplinary actions. Thank you for your thorough and professional account." Naomi nodded once. No satisfaction, no celebration. Discipline was not about emotion. It was about precision. She stepped out of the room into a quiet hallway, lights harsh on the tile floor. Marcus and Elena met her outside. She handled it flawlessly. Marcus said quietly, pride evident but restrained. Naomi shook her head slightly. "Flawless is relative. The hearing is only one step. The officers in the department will respond, and the public will interpret events in fragments. Patience, documentation, and continued vigilance remain our tools." Elena exhaled. "But they saw it, Captain. Even without your classified details, the truth came through. They couldn't discredit you this time." Naomi allowed herself a brief nod. Truth is powerful, but it requires persistence. One hearing does not rewrite culture or eliminate bias. It's an opening, not a conclusion. Outside the building, journalists crowded, cameras flashing, microphones extended. Naomi walked past calmly, letting Lila Grant speak on her behalf. Statements were precise, facts, context, and evidence. No emotion-driven spectacle. The narrative, finally, was aligned with reality. Inside, the officers who detained her huddled. Daniels muttered, voice low, "This is bad. They're going after us." Internal affairs, federal oversight, everything is scrutinized now. Roth nodded, silent. Confidence shattered. Uncertainty replaced it. For the first time, authority without accountability seemed fragile, exposed to the very systems it once controlled. Naomi returned to her unit that evening, exhausted but resolute. She briefed Marcus and Elena, reviewing public reaction, internal responses, and procedural adjustments. Every detail mattered. Every step was now strategic, carefully measured to maximize accountability and minimize risk. As she watched the city lights through her office window, reflections shimmering on wet streets below, Naomi allowed herself a single thought. The officers believed they had power, but power without responsibility is fragile. Exposure, discipline, and evidence, these were the true tools of change. And Naomi Carter wielded them with precision. The city felt different the morning after the hearing. Naomi Carter's name was no longer just a trending headline. It had become a symbol of accountability, a subtle yet seismic shift in public consciousness. The body cam footage, the meticulous records, and her composed testimony had combined to unravel the carefully spun narrative the officers had constructed. Inside the precinct, chaos simmered beneath the polished surfaces. Officer Daniel sat at his desk, slouched, eyes darting to every notification pinging across the monitor. Internal Affairs had requested further clarification. Supervisors demanded written statements, and federal oversight teams began asking pointed questions. Every word he had typed in those official reports now read like a self-incriminating confession. Roth paced the hallway, muttering under his breath. The promotion he had briefly celebrated now felt like a trap. Every colleague who had once nodded in approval now avoided his gaze. Authority, he realized bitterly, could not shield him from truth. Across town, Naomi's unit debriefed quietly, analyzing the fallout. Public reaction is stabilizing, but the officers' department is facing internal reviews, possible lawsuits, and disciplinary action. Marcus Hayes said, voice steady but tinged with relief. This is the first real pushback against the systemic inertia that allowed this to happen. Elena Vega nodded. The video and reports are circulating beyond our unit now. Even local journalists who were initially dismissive are reporting the discrepancies. They're calling it misconduct and abuse of authority. Naomi allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, though her expression remained neutral. Satisfaction, she reminded herself, was secondary to persistence. This is accountability, she said quietly. But it's not closure. Systems are slow. Bias doesn't disappear overnight. People may apologize publicly, but institutional patterns linger. Her phone buzzed. Lila Grant's voice came over the secure line. Captain Carter, the officers are facing suspension. Federal oversight is pushing for disciplinary hearings. There's even talk of criminal investigation if internal reviews substantiate misconduct. Naomi nodded silently. Expected. Let them proceed through process. Our role is observation, documentation, and strategy. Personal vindication is irrelevant. Meanwhile, Daniels received a call summoning him to the precinct supervisor's office. The conversation lasted 30 minutes, though the details were clipped and formal. By the end, he left pale-faced, the weight of procedural accountability pressing down. Roth followed, equally shaken. For the first time, neither could rely on authority alone to shield them from consequences. Outside, Naomi walked the streets quietly. Rain-slicked streets reflected neon signs and passerby faces. Some recognized her, offering nods of respect. Others glanced curiously at the figure they had once seen on trending clips without context. She felt the mixture of relief and vigilance settle over her. The officer's downfall was underway, but her life, her unit, and the work ahead remained uncompromised. At headquarters, the unit strategized the next steps. Marcus summarized. Internal Affairs and Federal Oversight are working through the reports. The officers' records are under intense scrutiny. Legal teams are preparing for hearings, and public opinion is aligned in favor of accountability. We need to monitor, update evidence, and ensure every procedural step is airtight. Naomi leaned back, silent for a moment. The cost of these victories weighed on her. Emotional exhaustion, sleepless nights, the constant pressure being scrutinized, it was all part of the system she navigated. She had protected herself with discipline, but every public vindication carried a personal toll. Later that evening, Naomi received a message from one of the officers who had detained her. It was short, formal. tinged with unspoken guilt. Captain Carter, I understand the severity of my actions. I accept accountability. She read it once, then set her phone aside. There was no triumph, no personal satisfaction to extract. Accountability, once earned, needed no embellishment. The message was a confirmation of the process unfolding correctly, a rare alignment between consequence and action. Naomi's gaze shifted toward the city skyline, lights flickering in the dusk. The system was imperfect. Some officers would remain unrepentant. Some injustices would persist. But this moment, the exposure, the hearings, the pressure applied to authority, was a critical fracture in the structure that had protected bias for too long. At her apartment later that night, Naomi reflected on the journey from arrest to exposure. She had walked the line between vulnerability and power, between patience and action. She had faced officers empowered by systemic assumptions, media narratives that twisted perception, and a public unprepared to interpret nuance. And yet, through discipline, preparation, and strategic action, she had turned those forces to achieve accountability. Her team sent final updates. The officer's suspension was confirmed, internal investigations continued, and initial disciplinary actions were underway. Public statements were being prepared to reflect transparency and responsibility. Naomi reviewed each detail, cross-referenced evidence, and prepared contingency plans for any narrative shifts. Finally, she allowed herself to sit back, closing her eyes. Not relief, not celebration, but recognition of the cost, the weight of exposure, the strain of discipline, and emotional labor of navigating a world unready to confront bias. Accountability had been served, but the process left scars, subtle and enduring. Naomi's phone buzzed one last time. Marcus's message was simple. We're ready for the next step when you are. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease fractionally. The officers had been exposed. Systemic accountability was in motion. The victory was procedural, measured, and deliberate. It was justice of a kind that demanded patience and integrity, not spectacle. And while the emotional cost was real, Naomi Carter remained steadfast, prepared for whatever came next, knowing that resilience and discipline were her true shields. The city had returned to its rhythm, but for Naomi Carter, nothing felt entirely the same. Morning traffic, the hum of conversations, and the distant wail of sirens reminded her that life went on, indifferent to individual battles. The officers who had detained her faced disciplinary measures, internal reviews, and public scrutiny. But the patterns that allowed such encounters persisted in subtler forms, woven into systems too large for a single victory to erase. Naomi stood on her balcony, coffee steaming in her hands, watching the streets below. She had read the coverage, editorials praising transparency, social media posts defending accountability, and yes, some dismissive comments claiming she had overreacted or used influence. It was all part of the terrain she had come to navigate. Facts were immutable, but perception remained fluid. Marcus Hayes joined her, leaning against the railing. It's done. Well, as done as it gets with bureaucracy, he said. The officer suspensions are in effect. Internal investigations continue, and public statements are aligned with transparency. You set the precedent. Naomi nodded quietly. I didn't set the precedent. The truth did. We documented, exposed, and held systems to account. That's all we can control. Elena Vega appeared behind them, tablet in hand. Social feeds are still monitoring responses. Public awareness is higher than we've seen before. Communities are starting to ask questions about local law enforcement practices. Accountability measures, small ripples, but meaningful. Naomi took a slow sip of her coffee, letting the warmth steady her. Ripples are where change begins, she said softly. One incident, carefully documented, can shift perception, encourage dialogue, and expose patterns. But systemic change is a marathon, not a sprint. We've started the marathon. Marcus exhaled, scanning the horizon. And the cost. Naomi's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. Emotional fatigue, scrutiny, sleepless nights. The constant awareness that your competence and identity are questioned because of assumptions others make. It's exhausting but necessary. Justice has a cost. Truth does too. The phone buzzed, encrypted, from Lila Grant. Captain Carter, Internal Affairs confirms that final disciplinary actions will include formal reprimands, policy review recommendations, and documentation of misconduct for promotion boards. This is unprecedented in your case. Your evidence and composure were decisive. Naomi's lips pressed into a thin line. Decisive, yes, but not complete. Accountability is ongoing. Systemic change is slow. The officers face consequences, but the structure that allowed their behavior still exists. This is a step, not a conclusion. Later, in the operations room, Naomi reviewed logs, videos, and documentation once more. She and her team cross-referenced every detail, ensuring redundancy in evidence, clarity in timelines, and airtight correlation between narrative and fact. It was meticulous work, but essential. Patterns of bias could not be left to interpretation. They had to be irrefutable. Elena spoke up, voice tinged with quiet pride. You turned a personal attack, a misrepresentation, into systemic accountability. People underestimate what patience and strategy can achieve. Naomi's expression softened fractionally. It's not about personal victory. It's about setting a standard. No one should face unchecked abuse of authority without recourse. Every report, every record, every video preserved is a building block for accountability. By evening, Naomi walked the streets again, blending into the crowd, observing without interference. She noticed microaggressions, subtle dismissals, moments of bias that remain uncorrected. But she also noticed awareness, curiosity, and the quiet attention of people starting to question assumptions. Change was uneven, partial, but present. Her phone vibrated one last time for the day. A secure message from Marcus read, all systems monitored, public attention stabilized, evidence preserved, team ready for future contingencies. Naomi exhaled slowly, tension releasing in a measured rhythm. The officers who detained her were facing consequences. Public attention was engaged, and her unit remained vigilant. But the emotional weight, being constantly underestimated, misrepresented, and scrutinized, would remain with her. She reflected on the irony. Victory and exposure and accountability brought no joy, only clarity. Triumph was procedural, factual, disciplined. The cost was internal, unseen by the public, carried in sleepless nights, quiet reflection, and the burden of navigating a world that often misjudged competence and authority based on race. Yet she allowed herself a subtle acknowledgement of resilience. Naomi Carter had transformed a humiliating incident into a lesson in systemic accountability. She had documented injustice, ensured evidence was indisputable, and forced the system to confront bias it had long tolerated. Her strategy, patience, and professionalism had turned powerlessness into leverage. As she looked out over the city, rain-slicked streets reflecting the neon glow, she realized the truth. Systemic change was ongoing, imperfect, and slow, but progress had begun. And while the officers learned the consequences of their misjudgment, she had also proven something more personal, that discipline, clarity, and resilience were tools stronger than authority misused. Naomi set down her coffee, returning inside to her team. Screens displayed ongoing monitoring, evidence cataloging, and secure communications. Every detail was accounted for, every contingency considered. The work continued, but she was ready, always ready. And for a moment, alone in the quiet of the operations center, she allowed herself a simple, grounding thought. Justice was never easy, truth was never convenient, and resilience, measured, patient, unwavering, was the only shield strong enough to endure both. Naomi Carter had survived the system, confronted bias, and emerged not unscathed but unbroken. The months that followed were a careful balance of vigilance, patience, and incremental progress. Naomi Carter returned to her routines, the rhythm of her unit's operations, and the quiet intensity of federal work. But the shadow of that night lingered, a reminder that justice was never simple or immediate. The officers who had detained her faced formal disciplinary action. Daniels received a suspension accompanied by mandatory retraining, while Roth was removed from field duties and placed under probationary review. Their reputations were tarnished. Colleagues whispered behind closed doors. Promotions evaporated, and the specter of accountability hung over every decision they made. It was neither revenge nor spectacle. It was consequence, measured and undeniable. Yet Naomi understood that punishment alone did not correct systemic bias. Policies were updated, procedures clarified, and officers were required to undergo implicit bias and compliance training. Media coverage reflected the changes cautiously, balancing the narrative with statements of transparency from local and federal authorities. Naomi watched from a distance, her unit maintaining surveillance over the situation, ensuring that progress was documented, monitored, and preserved. One crisp morning, she walked through the city streets, observing, listening, cataloging. The world seemed unchanged on the surface. Cars honking, people rushing, streetlights flickering, but she noticed subtle shifts. A few pedestrians paused to acknowledge her presence. Some officers approached with tempered respect, and conversations about accountability quietly permeated small groups she passed. It was a small, almost invisible proof that exposure and consistency had begun to ripple outward. Back at the unit, Naomi briefed her team. "We secure accountability for this incident, but that is only one story in a system full of untold ones," she said. Her tone was calm, yet every word carried weight. "Our work is not complete. Systemic bias and misuse of authority persist in ways less visible, less documented. Our responsibility is ongoing, observation, documentation, intervention when appropriate." Marcus Hayes nodded. "We've established a precedent," he said. "Your handling of the situation has already changed the expectations for accountability in our jurisdiction. People are paying attention now in a way they weren't before." Naomi allowed herself a faint smile, brief and measured. Attention alone is not enough. Discipline, vigilance, and persistence create lasting change. This is a foundation. We build on it carefully. That evening, Naomi received a call from Lila Grant. "Captain Carter," Lila said, voice steady, "the officer's disciplinary records are now officially documented. Internal review reports show clear evidence of misconduct and procedural failure. Public statements have emphasized transparency. The system, flawed though it is, has acknowledged wrongdoing." Naomi nodded quietly. "Good. Let's ensure it remains documented. No room for ambiguity. Justice is not final until it's permanent." Later, in her apartment, Naomi reflected on the emotional cost. The humiliation of being misjudged, the tension of watching every movement in the city, the sleepless nights spent cataloging evidence. All of it had left its mark. The emotional weight was real and lingering, though tempered by the knowledge that persistence and discipline had prevailed. The officer's authority had been challenged, their misconduct exposed, and the public narrative corrected, not with spectacle, but with methodical, undeniable proof. She glanced at the city skyline, lights flickering through the window like fragments of 1,000 untold stories. One incident could spark accountability, but systemic change would take years. Naomi understood that patience was a tool as powerful as courage. Every documented case, every careful observation, every strategic action added to the slow accumulation of justice. Her team gathered in the operations center, screens flickering with monitoring systems, secured communications, and archived evidence. They had preserved everything: video footage, reports, timestamps, transcripts, public statements. Each file was a testament to the principle that discipline and foresight could transform vulnerability into leverage. Naomi sat quietly, reviewing the day's updates. A secure message pinged from Marcus: "System stable. Accountability in progress. Team ready for future contingencies." She allowed herself a single moment of quiet satisfaction. Not triumph, not vindication, but recognition that careful, patient work had produced tangible results. The city outside continued to move at its relentless pace. Life went on for ordinary citizens, oblivious to the intricacies of accountability and the subtle shifts in power dynamics. Yet Naomi had changed one reality: that injustice, when documented and exposed, could no longer hide behind authority. That patience, strategy, and resilience could force consequence. That bias, no matter how systemic, was not invincible. As night fell, Naomi stepped onto her balcony once more, the city lights reflecting off wet streets below. She allowed herself a single thought: justice did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered, persistent and patient, until even the strongest assumptions and most entrenched biases could no longer ignore it. She thought of Daniels and Roth, their authority diminished, their decisions scrutinized, and their actions permanently recorded. She thought of the countless others whose voices had been silenced, whose rights had been questioned, and she thought of herself, resilient, disciplined, unwavering. She had survived, not because the world was fair, but because she had prepared, observed, and acted with precision. Naomi Carter returned inside, leaving the balcony empty, letting the city hum around her. The night was quiet, her unit vigilant, the evidence preserved, and the systems of accountability in motion. The officers had faced consequences, the public had seen the truth, and the weight of exposure had forced reflection where arrogance once ruled. And in that quiet, deliberate moment, Naomi understood the core of what she had achieved. Justice was not spectacle, it was methodical. Accountability was not instant, it was patient. And resilience, disciplined, measured, unwavering, was the ultimate shield. She allowed herself to rest. Not relief, not celebration. Just quiet justice,